This is another live look at the scene right now by Reagan National Airport. Again, the airport is closed, not surprising given what has happened this evening, and still a very active scene at this hour.
Yeah, no question. We want to bring in ABC's aviation analyst, John Nance. And John, it's good to see you, but not under these circumstances. You've covered so many crashes in your career. Tell us what you're thinking about this, based on what you saw, based on a helicopter right behind that passenger plane, and how did they crash? What's your thoughts?
Well, you've got a classic midair collision here, two airplanes trying to occupy the same space. And how that happened, one of the tragedies here is this is one of the most controlled pieces of airspace in the world, because it's right adjacent to the Capitol and to downtown Washington, D.C. A controller was talking to both pilots, but how in the world they came to misunderstand, or somebody misunderstood a command, that's one of the things that's going to have to be sorted out. Hopefully we'll be able to get the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. But this is one of those accidents that we're not talking about blame. We're talking about how in the world does one aircraft end up in the path of the other aircraft. That's going to be the key point, because we didn't have anything obviously wrong with either bird. And to have an Army Blackhawk, which is a very, very sophisticated airplane, involved in this is also extremely worrisome.
You know, John, over the last few years, there's been a lot of conversations about close calls. We report on them more often than we would like, and concerns about air traffic controllers, whether or not there's enough, whether or not they're getting the support they need. You know, where does all this factor into this equation as we take a look at what happened here near Reagan National?
Well, as we look at this, one of the things, of course, that is absolutely true, we talk quite a bit in the media about near misses that are really kind of a mile and a half or maybe a half a mile, and they violated the basic provisions of not getting air traffic close to each other. But this was not one of those situations. This is just a brought-on collision. And as I say, one of the most controlled pieces of airspace in the country. So how these two came to be where they were at that particular point in time is going to be one of the major questions that's going to be on the table immediately. And of course, everything will be looked at. The other thing that's really worrisome is this is very much like the January 12th, 1982 collision, or not collision, but the flight that could not sustain flight after takeoff of Palm 90, which was a 737 that hit the 14th Street Bridge. And the reason I bring that up is because there were survivors of the accident to the extent that they were underwater, but they drowned essentially because of the cold water, because of the inability to rescue anybody else, and that was something that we have here, very much reminiscent in terms of the water temperature, which is just a little bit above freezing.
John, we hear so much about collision avoidance systems, and certainly the Blackhawk helicopter would have one. Certainly the passenger plane would have one. What happened here? What did it not go in? Was it too low to go in?
I think that probably what we're going to find is that this helicopter probably did not have a system that you described here, which is basically a collision avoidance, TCAS we call it. Yeah. And it probably came in from an angle in such a way that the TCAS wouldn't have had time to give a climb or descend warning to the pilots. We just don't know at this point. Blackhawks are extremely sophisticated, but they are not normally in civilian airspace, and therefore they don't have necessarily the same level of equipment.
Yeah, good point.
John, we want to bring in Eyewitness News reporter Josh Einiger, who is following this story for us tonight. We want to bring him back into the conversation with a question for you. Josh.
Well, John, it's good to talk to you. I know I've heard a lot of pilots over the years talk about how Reagan National, not unlike LaGuardia, is just a tricky airport to fly into. It's busy, it's congested, the runways are short. One thing I've also noticed always is the presence of these military helicopters that are all over the place because of the nature of where this is. Could you talk a little bit about, as a pilot, what you're looking at when you're coming into Reagan National in particular, and is it just too complicated for passenger flight given all the military operations there?
Well, the military operations are always subservient to the interests of security for the arriving and departing jetliners, and they're under very positive control of air traffic control before they even leave high altitude, aiming or coming into the Washington area. So each one of those helicopters, regardless of what their specific role is, has the responsibility to stay the heck away from the most critical corridors for landing and takeoff, and they do a wonderful job. They're there in some cases as security. They're there in other cases for executive transportation for the government. But they have an absolute unshakable duty to stay away from the flight paths of any of the civilian airliners. And that's one of the things that it sounds to me like there was a radio call. We don't know this yet for certain because it's very early, but that the helicopter pilot was told to do something, and whether or not that was done, whether it was an error in the transmission or not, we don't know. But this is one of the last places I would expect to have this kind of a collision, because the folks in our military helicopters are very, very cognizant of how to stay out of the way.
John, you mentioned that you're waiting to hear what actually came out of all the communications. How long does that usually take to go public?
I think we'll probably have some readout for the general public within 24 hours because it is a public channel, and there's going to be other stuff. Of course, we won't know what's on the flight data recorder or the cockpit voice recorder for a little while, but this one, because of where it is and because of the severity of the crash, I think we will learn a lot fairly quickly. The National Transportation Safety Board is headquartered in Washington. They are already all over this. And they have a tendency to basically talk to the public as soon as they reasonably can. So I wouldn't expect it'll go too long. But I caution, there is never, ever one cause to an aerial accident. Never, ever. Never seen it, never will. Right. So there'll be more that we'll find out over time.
Yeah, John, thank you very much for being with us tonight and educating us to some respects. Chief Meteorologist Lee Goldberg, who's like you, taking a look at this scene tonight, that water in the Potomac, so cold, so dark. He's got a quick question for you.
John, looking at some of the wind observations, there was a gust in D.C. to about 40 miles an hour this afternoon, but it had subsided. Around that 9 o'clock observation at Reagan National, the gusts were about 26 miles an hour, which doesn't seem off the charts. But could slight turbulence as approaching landing or that type of gust, could that have shimmied a plane off course slightly?
It is possible. You say, probability and possibility. It's not probable, but it is possible that there was an upset of either the jetliner or the helicopter that somehow got their two courses to intercept. But that's pretty wild when you consider the fact that they're very well aware that they've got to be in the place that they are supposed to be. The jet coming in for landing, the American Eagle flight, certainly is following an instrument landing system approach, and the folks in the helicopter are hopefully doing what they need to do to stay out of the way. How that came to grief probably does not involve the weather, but I will tell you that that's 25, 35 knot gusts. That's pretty significant.
John Nance, very much appreciate all this critical information. We'll continue to track this, and thank you and turn to you for any new information that comes forward.